Alright, so I decided, as you can see from the title of this video, to do my top 10 favorite comic book films of all time. So these are obviously my personal opinion, and they're the films that I've enjoyed going back to and watching, on a pretty consistent basis. And the funny thing is I don't own a lot of these films, but if they're ever on TV, I'll usually stop and watch them. I own a few of them, but just not too many of them. I don't typically tend to buy comic book adaptation films, but that doesn't mean that I don't appreciate them. And these are just some of the ones that really strike a chord with me, and have helped the genre, because there are a lot of movies that have definitely hurt the genre, and I'll be doing that in the next video, my top 10 worst comic book movies of all time. But here we go with the top 10 best. So my number 10 is going to be Men in Black. This came out, I believe, in 1997, starring Tommy Lee Jones and Will Smith. And what I like about this movie is just the energy of it and how funny it is, and how the movie doesn't really take itself too seriously, but it's very well made. It's very well made. The effects, they still hold, most of the effects still hold up today. They are very good effects. And this movie made quite a bit of money at the box office, generated 2 sequels, which aren't really all that great. But this first movie especially, this is kind of what launched Will Smith's career. And him and Tommy Lee Jones have this great chemistry that they're really good playing off each other. I really like that. And just the Tommy Lee Jones's dry, sardonic sense of humor with Will Smith's energized, boy from Philadelphia. I mean, it just works really well together. They're one of the great comedic duos, I would say, in recent times. And it's just a lighthearted movie that's fun, that you can pop in anytime. And the ride, they made a ride, which is also pretty fun, over at Universal Studios. So it's definitely had a lasting impression on culture. So my number 9 movie is Spider-Man 2. This is the only Spider-Man movie that made it onto this list. It's the best one, I think, out of the entire bunch. It took everything that worked in Spider-Man 1 and elevated it. It really gave us a good 3-dimensional villain with a lot of depth in Dr. Octopus, played by Alfred Molina. It delved more into Peter Parker's psyche and why he starts to lose his powers in the film, and he starts to wonder why. And it's because maybe he hasn't quite figured out why he should be Spider-Man. So that the film, I mean, it's funny. There are a lot of funny moments in it, but it also does take it takes Spider-Man seriously as a character, which I really liked. And I like the evolution too of seeing James Franco as Harry Osborn growing more and more disillusioned with Spider-Man and hating the character of Spider-Man because he thinks that he killed his father in the end of the first movie. And you get to see his kind of descent into psychosis and madness. And the cliffhanger at the very end is also really great. They got me so pumped for Spider-Man 3, which might be on my next video in top 10 worst comic book movies of all time, because it was a letdown. So my number 8 movie then is the only movie I have in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, and that is Iron Man. I have never been a big fan of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. I think that the movies, ultimately, each one is never satisfying on its own, because they just build onto each other, and they're just trying to get you to go see the next movie, versus trying to tell a self-contained story that's satisfying on its own end. I only think a couple of movies have actually done that, Iron Man being one of them. I think it was because it was at the very beginning, early stages of the Marvel universe, and they weren't really sure if they were going to be going the full route with it at the time. And so what they then focused and made like a really quality movie, and it shows. Robert Downey Jr., they brought him back from the depths. He was really not in a lot of movies because of his drug addictions, and then going into rehab, and this role is perfect for him. And I've liked this movie the more I've watched it, because the first few times I watched it, I didn't really think it was all that great. But then as I've seen it more on TV, I've come to appreciate it, and it says a lot about our society and mechanized warfare. And then my number 7 movie is The Dark Knight Rises. I actually own that movie right here, the Dark Knight trilogy. I really I've liked this movie more and more as the years have gone on. It's been about almost 4 years now since it came out. That's hard to believe. The first few times I watched it, I mean, I still have a couple plot problems with the movie, but overall, I feel like it wrapped up the series really well, and it brought everything full circle, especially for the character of Bruce Wayne. This is a Bruce Wayne movie, and I think a lot of people were a little taken aback by that because The Dark Knight was very much a Batman movie. It wasn't a Bruce Wayne movie. Bruce Wayne really wasn't in that movie a whole lot. It was mostly Batman. And then Batman Begins was mostly Bruce Wayne. So this movie I felt like brought everything full circle. I really liked the introduction of, I mean, this movie had to introduce us to 3 new characters, which is crazy. If you don't know, 4 really, if you think about it. Bane, Catwoman, Selina Kyle, Joseph Gordon-Levitt's character, John Blake, who at the end of the movie is taking up the mantle, and then also Marion Cotillard's character, who I won't spoil it, but her character as well. So this movie had 4 characters that Nolan had to introduce. You don't see too many third movies in a franchise introducing new characters, especially the conclusion of a story, which this very much was a conclusion of the overall story of what he was telling with Batman. And I mean, I like third movies. I like conclusions, and I thought this wrapped it up really well. And I think it's going to become regarded better as the years go on. It's just the script probably could have used a little bit more tuning up, but overall, I felt like it was nice to see Batman be challenged physically because we never saw that before. We never saw him actually have to fight somebody who, can basically just kick his ass. And seeing how he overcomes all of that at the end of the movie is really, really cool. So my number 6 film then is X2 X-Men United. Now, I actually saw this movie before I saw the first X-Men movie, hard to believe. This came out in the summer of 2003, so I would have been going into my freshman year of high school at the time, and I hadn't seen the first X-Men movie. For whatever reason, I just missed it. I didn't see it in the theaters. And I saw this one, and I was blown. I was I was a little lost at the beginning because it does pick up right after the events of X1, the first X-Men movie. So I was a little lost at the beginning. I remember when I first watched this in theaters, but then as it went on, I'm like, wow, this is actually really good. It's a great character-driven story, and I like how the sides are completely, the roles are turned, and Magneto was the villain of the first movie. Is the villain of the second movie, but in this one he's not really. He's actually kind of an anti-hero in this movie. He's working with the X-Men, which you really don't see that in the movies very often, at least in the older movies. You see it later on. But I just really like the story of this movie. I thought that William Stryker was a great villain, and it was also cool. Nightcrawler was really, really fun to watch in the movie, and overall they balanced a lot of characters in this movie, and they gave them all their justice. So yeah, that's why it's number 6. Number 5 is Superman 2, the Richard Donner cut. I like this movie so much better than any incarnation of Superman that we've gotten, including Man of Steel. I didn't really care for that movie. Superman Returns was boring. But yeah, the first 2 Superman movies, but especially this movie, I really like the Superman 2, the Richard Donner cut, because it has Zod in it, a good version of Zod. Terrence Stamp plays him in this version, and the effects are better than the first movie, the story's better than the first movie, and the acting is better than the first movie. Everything just works better in this movie. And I really like how Lex Luthor, played by Gene Hackman, and Zod, I like the dynamic between those two and how they represent different challenges for Superman and Christopher Reeve. So my number 4 film is another X-Men movie, X-Men First Class. I was debating whether or not I was going to put X-Men Days of Future Past or X-Men First Class on this list because I like both of those movies, but for different reasons. And X-Men First Class, I think I like it a little more and I appreciate it more because it saved the franchise. It really did. X-Men After the Last Stand and X-Men Origins Wolverine those 2 movies were so bad they almost just killed this franchise completely. They took it in a terrible direction, completely neglecting character development and just coherent storylines for special effects and just popcorn entertainment. And for X-Men First Class, really, I love how you see the origins of Magneto and Charles Xavier and Mystique, and you get to see how these people became who they were based on their environments, and how, if you take a person and you put them in a situation that Magneto was in, Eric Lencher, where he grew up and he was in a concentration camp and he was separated from his family, versus Charles Xavier, who, grew up kind of a privileged life. I mean, he lived in a big mansion. He had supportive parents, and you see how that affected their personalities for the rest of their life and how they view humanity and mutants' roles, and their relationship with humans. And it's fascinating to see that, and how they work together because they have a common goal. And Magneto will, it's interesting because he'll always work with the X-Men when it benefits him and when it benefits mutants. But if it doesn't, all bets are off. So I really like that character dynamic between Xavier and Magneto, and really that's what's driven all of these movies, but it's really highlighted well in First Class and in Days of Future Past, but especially in X-Men First Class, because it's when they first meet. So my number 3 comic book film of all time is Watchmen, and it's actually this version of Watchmen that I have, which is the director's cut here. Watchmen, it's a great looking film, but not only that, it's very well made, and it's got very interesting characters who all represent something different on like the superhero mythology, and how this film kind of takes superheroes and turns them on their head, saying, well, what if superheroes actually existed in the real world? How would they be viewed by humanity, but also how would they view humanity, and their role as saviors, so to speak. I really, really appreciate how this movie tackled those issues, and it was very faithful to the graphic novel. And I mean, could the dialogue have been a little better at times? Yeah, Zack Snyder's not really known for his dialogue, but he is known for his visuals. In this film, I think it's his best looking film of all of them. So that I'm not really super hopeful for Batman versus Superman, because I didn't like what Snyder did with Man of Steel, particularly with the action sequences. I felt like they were just incoherent messes. I couldn't tell what was going on. And not only that, the dialogue was terrible in that movie, but he's got different screenwriters for Batman vs. Superman, and the fact that it has Batman in it, it makes me a little bit more excited. So anyway, moving on to number 2. Number 2 is Batman Begins, Christopher Nolan's first foray into the Batman universe. And this film, to me, it saved Batman from just nothing. You'll notice I have a few movies on this list that I say saved their franchises. Well, this film definitely saved Batman. And one of the lines that Michael Caine says multiple times throughout the movie is, "Why do we fall, Master Bruce? So we can learn to pick ourselves back up." Well, this film is with Batman Begins, because Batman fell so far from grace with Batman Forever or especially with Batman and Robin, which I'll talk about in my next video. This movie saved it and brought Batman back to the public conscious, and for me at least, I saw this in theaters in 2005, and I remember when I saw it with one of my friends and we walked out, and I was just like, oh my gosh, they did it. They made a Batman movie that is relevant and says a lot about society. And Christian Bale was, I even remember one of these old reviews I posted. I said Christian Bale is the perfect Bruce Wayne and Batman. And you're really playing 3 characters when you're playing this role. I always tell people you're playing the Bruce Wayne public persona, which is like a fake character that he puts on to just basically con people. You're playing Batman, and you're playing the real Bruce Wayne. The real Bruce Wayne is a character I don't think that has ever been captured. Val Kilmer kind of touched on it a little bit in Batman Forever, but the real Bruce Wayne is actually he's a very sad human being, and he's depressed. He doesn't know what his place is in the world. He uses Batman as an outlet to vent his anger and his fear that he has. And this movie really tackled that well, and how he uses Batman to basically exercise these demons from himself, so to speak. And a lot's been said about this movie. I won't say any more, but it just saved the Batman franchise. it gave us, I think, the best incarnation of Batman in Christian Bale's interpretation of the character. And you know, put Christopher Nolan on the map also, because before that he hadn't made a big budget movie, but then he really took this film, which had like $150 million budget, and really made it his own. It is very much a Christopher Nolan movie. So my number one movie is, surprise, The Dark Knight. I would be hard. I would guess that this is number one on a lot of people's comic book or superhero movies lists, and it's number one on my list, simply because this film took the comic book film, the genre, and elevated it and brought it beyond the comic book roots. It really is like a crime gangster film that just happens to have Batman in it. And I mean, the Joker and Heath Ledger's interpretation of that character, and he really holds this film together. But also the very interesting and underrated part of this movie is Harvey Dent and his transformation and his fall to become Two-Face. And this movie, it has such a great downbeat ending. You know, it's got a glimmer of hope, but at the same time, it's very much a downbeat ending. I love it for it, because it didn't cater to, you know, making this just like a typical Batman movie. Like, and I'm not saying that the Tim Burton movies aren't good in their own respect, but they're more mainstream than this movie is. This movie, just because it made a lot of money, its ideas were not mainstream. It tackles a lot of serious issues, you know, chaos, anarchy, duality, you know, the consequentialism. I mean, there's so much stuff in this movie to go through, but you know. And also, Christopher Nolan, he improved so much in the action sequences from the first movie. The first movie, he was really up close with all the action. You couldn't really tell what was going on. And in this movie, he pulls the camera back, and you can actually see, you know, Batman fighting and how Batman fights, which is very precise. You know, he doesn't use a lot of energy because his moves are so quick. He is very quick. His moves are designed to, like, just take people out, you know, very quickly. And I love obviously the dynamic between Batman and Joker. You can't beat that. It's one of the greatest hero and villain yin and yang stories ever created, and they do it perfectly, especially in that interrogation room scene, which I think is the best scene in the entire trilogy, because it captures everything that is about those characters. You know, the Batman saying that, you know, we can recognize that a world is an imperfect place, but that doesn't mean that the societal norms are useless. And then the Joker goes like, aha, but just because, you know, because there is a loss of innocence, that means that there never was any innocence. You know, because there is injustice, that means that there never was justice. So, you know, it's a very interesting conflict that they have. It's more of a psychological conflict than a physical conflict, especially at the end of the movie too, when Batman has faith in Gotham and the people, that they won't do what the Joker wants them to do. And so, you know, it's a great conflict that they have, and it's one that's not easily resolved, and that's why it's continued to, you know, be in that's why it's continued its legacy from the video games to the movies to the comic books throughout all these years. So anyway, those are my top 10 comic book films. Next time I'm going to do a top 10 worst comic book films, and I think that list might be a little bit more fun because there are a lot of bad ones out there. More bad ones than good ones, I think. The top 10 good ones was actually really hard for me to do because there's a lot of just average meh comic book films. Not a lot of great ones, but then there's a lot of bad ones. So I'll talk about that in my next video, so stay tuned for that.